First of all, thanks to all the speakers. It's been a great afternoon. I guess the first question I'd like to put out there is, and this relates to the question about, has facilities management and planning picked up on the model? I mean, in the industry, there was, we know that the industry has its problem. And the proprietary report comes out that identifies the lack of take-up for digital technologies as one of those primary problems. So I'm wondering, will open source solutions and and Antonio's enthusiasm is infectious. Will open source solution possibly lower that barrier or encourage more individuals to engage with digital technologies? Because again, perhaps not a steep learning curve or greater transparency as to what's happening when you inside the box, so to speak. So, Greg, maybe I'll pitch that one to you first.
Greg or Antonio?
Sorry, Greg.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I think that there's two ways of looking at things, and I think that both ways are complementary. One way is thinking that the change will come from pioneers, individuals that decide that they want to change for the better, and they team up and they learn and they become software developers like myself, and they try to make a change. And that's probably going to contribute. But another way of looking at things, which is the way that we are trying to achieve, is that when I was talking about the S in ICOMS, I put the S on the right side of the word, and that was intentional, because in my experience, the different parts of the industry, if they are on the right, they have more money. And I think that the S is one of the parts with bigger relationship between the investment and the return. And it's very lucrative. And this is something that all the companies are aware of. It's very common to see construction companies that are in different parts of the acronym that make architecture, construction, and also operations. And many of them also want to get into software. And I think that the way these big guys that are not the big software guys, are the other big guys, are going to step into BIM software is going to be through open source. So it's like open source has these two phases, the big corp phase and also the smaller scale phase, from above and from the bottom. So I think both things will happen more or less at the same time.
So Stephen, to your specific question, I think you're targeting at the like Carlton's facilities group as a target audience in that question. Maybe I actually think it really comes when somebody makes a specific functionality that's for them. Because one of the things that I think Antonio highlighted is the idea that you can build more tools quickly when you have these pieces of software. But at a high level, what everybody has done, and it's not to degrade the digital twin project, but it's a very generalized tool right now, but the technology is what exists to make a very specific tool for a group. And so someone has to do that. It's just a lot easier in an open source platform to do that versus, a viewer is a viewer is a viewer. Why is it special to me? I think that's really the gap, is that people don't build tools for specific use cases. They build generic tools right now.
Well, I tend to agree. I think there needs to be, so the operators, they have a need or there's a gap in the tools on the market. That's a critical system. I think there's still, from architecture, so not the operators world, but still maybe a gap in understanding what they need to do, what they can do, or what's possible, and that's still setting the tone. But definitely a mechanism to service a need that they might not have.
Thanks for keeping the conversation. I want to touch on a point that Greg raised in our pre-meeting about a week ago. And that's about the depth of subject knowledge that's required for being a software developer or being an architect or being a construction manager for that matter. And so the idea of wearing two hats. And so you were just saying that you've made the transition from architect to developer. So, I mean, is it possible to function as both and actually really contribute significantly to the industry? Because again, both industries are actually multi-layered and quite complex. Greg, I don't know if you wanted to start off with that one.
One thing, I think the sound quality is not very good, and it's a bit hard for me to understand what everyone's saying, and I think that's also the case for other people in the chat. So I don't know, maybe.
Just let me try to. So is that better?
Not a lot. Sorry. Maybe you can pass around the microphone, or
Is this better? Is this better?
There's a lot of reverb, so it's hard to.
Is this the one that works? Can you hear me now?
The audio,
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, perfectly. Yeah, now it's perfect.
How many times have we said that over the last 3 years? So, Antonio, I was referring to a point that Greg raised last week in our meeting when he said that in order to be a subject expert in both computer programming and architecture is difficult, because both disciplines are complex and multi-layered. So I'm wondering, and you yourself have told us today that you've made the transition from architect to programmer, software developer. So is it possible for an architect to be a part-time programmer, part-time developer, and still have enough depth of knowledge in order to truly contribute to the community? Or at some point do you have to decide?
No, I mean, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is I'm an advocate for the just-in-time learning strategy. So I would say that instead of trying to say, okay, I'm going to become an expert in this field, maybe it's wiser to just set yourself short-term goals and say, okay, maybe I can start and see how it goes. If I like it, what can I start doing? If I enjoy it, getting a bit involved in the community, and then start walking from that starting square, right? I mean, I have worked full-time as software developer, and it's perfectly possible. And I strongly believe that making a building is much more complicated than making software. But that's just my impression.
yeah. So Stephen, I think the comment that you referenced was specifically around is this sort of the idea that people go to architecture school, learn a little scripting, and then want to go into full-time software development, I think was the context of sort of thinking through this. And I made the point up until last week, I'd never written a line of code, but I managed software developers. And so I think one of the things that's sort of an interesting area is you can know a little bit about a software and a lot about a building, the building industry, and really help a software developer build a tool for you. And I think if you know a lot about software and a little bit about a building, you need somebody else to help you. I think the odds of coming out of school and learning both and being an expert are low. But at the same time, there's all kinds of different roles in architecture, and there's many different roles in software development. Like there's people that manage software development and aren't writing code every day. People that spec products and stuff like this. So I just think it's at least from my perspective, the idea from an educational standpoint, it's not a perfect fit to describe a path from architecture school into a firm to be useful in a software context. Maybe that's the sort of specific point.
So one issue that we have come up against with the digital twin project is data governance and data standards. And I'm wondering, Claudia, maybe you could come to this point first. Do we try? I mean, ideally, I suppose we would have the standards in place, and then we would begin the development. But that never happens.
No.
So how do we reconcile that gap?
When we're working without standards and then implement standards, or yeah, I mean, that's something I'm also day job working to kind of uncover. I think it depends on I think what we mean by standard. Like, I think that there's a lot of information that has been implemented inconsistently, but exists, so also the level of implementation or standardization is going to vary. So, we can all model things a wall differently. I don't know if we're ever going to make it so that we all model it exactly the same, because there's just so many options and so many ways that we can do that. So I think standardization is very important, but I don't know if there's any solution I can offer right now, because I'm still working through how we do that, where we've already, implemented BIM inconsistently across the country, and now we're trying to look at the data that we have that's been kind of created inconsistently, and now what are we going to do with it? I mean, my work at AECO, we're looking at how maybe development approvals can help standardize, so we all have to go through that process. And maybe that's a way we can implement some standardization where we can aggregate data, nationally. So that's what we're working on right now. But what information actually needs to be aggregated and needs to be consistent? It's not everything, right? So it's a tough question.
And I promised you I wouldn't ask you a tough question.
I think you did.
You always ask the hard questions. We as a student know.
Yeah, I think OpenBIM is intending to try to take, kind of inconsistent data and kind of export it into something that is standardized. And we are looking at using IFC to do that. But again, there's just so many variables in our built environment, and typologies are different, vertical versus, linear infrastructure. So lots of different things to consider.
Greg, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing I can add is I actually sat in on some of the early UK digital twin efforts. Wonderfully interesting meetings, but they all fall into the same category that Julie described, of sort of having a layered structure of access, and the person that provides it, or entity, or all these things, provides sort of derived access. So like, I can give my neighbor the exterior of my house, or I can give the city the exterior of my house, or the government, and it's sort of like the shell sort of view. So this is sort of very conceptual idea, but I think that's, at least from the developments we've seen thus far out of that, holds very, and aligns with the way you're thinking about it. It's not very actionable advice, but it makes sense.
We have a question in chat to Antonio and Greg. Do you think firms, say architecture firms, should then hire software engineers, or foster opportunities for architects to pursue open BIM development in-house? what actions what actions can practice take to foster this curiosity of build your own tools without compromising the primary goal of delivering building projects?
Okay, maybe I can give the answer first. So again, this falls down whether the two visions I was talking about earlier, will the change happen from the bottom or happen from the top? I believe that it's more likely that if tomorrow there are 20 construction companies spending 2 million a year on clash detection software, that they decide to invest in software development, and perhaps each company come up with a different solution, and the mere existence of having 20 different clash detector solutions in the market equalizes the market, because if you increment the number of sellers, the prices need to equalize, or the quality has to go up, right? That's the vision that I have, but I also believe that, of course, I mean, just to be able to have the conversation, a minimum amount of technical knowledge or software knowledge is required. So this is my opinion. I think it's less likely that the change will happen from the bottom. So in smaller architectural firms delivering software, because in the end, that's not what their business is. Their business is delivering buildings, right? But I mean, everything can happen. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, and specifically on the question about whether the firm should do it, what has always worked, and I think will continue to work, is if people want to make their lives better, then and they decide to build software or standardize something, that's absolutely something we should support. So that doesn't get in the way of, you know, if they want to learn Python to automate their job, that aids the firm and them. What doesn't work is this idea of making space for people to arbitrarily learn things. And so like, okay, we're going to have classes, but it doesn't work as a stretch. But people need to have a goal in mind for anything you learn. And the idea that you could just, you know, sort of, here's an hour a day to work on software, probably not going to solve a problem. So from that perspective of fostering people that want to solve their own individual problems, it absolutely helps. And then if it gets to the point, and some percentage of our tools work out this way, that somebody solves a problem once, we come in and help them. They either want to, I just want to be an architect, you can take it from me and make it better, and so everybody can use it, or they go down the path of wanting to work more in software. I think if we know what we want to solve, then we'll be much more apt to hire a, you know, a software engineer or somebody that has a professional background, because we can describe the problem pretty thoroughly. But I don't think we should limit people's ability to solve their own problems, because that's sort of what our world is. Everybody has a little problem.
Some people have lots of problems. Another question from the chat. Any comments on the complexity of the IFC standard? I personally think it's getting too complex and unwieldy. Are there any alternative data schemas standards that would be feasible to the AEC industry? Claudia, do you want to start with that? I wasn't a question for me, yes.
It's not a question for me. I know it is complicated. I don't know what else to say other than yeah, IFC is complicated. I think the ISO standard is complicated. I mean, it's complicated. It's not for, these are tools for professionals. I don't know if there's another schema. I guess the IFC, is there another, maybe Greg, you know, is there another schema?
I mean, not so, like GIS systems exist that could represent the 3D world, right? But if you're, I mean, it's really a very simple filter. If you want to have solid CG or CSG geometry or anything like that, then it's the only game in town. I mean, you could use step and then put a data layer on top of it, but there's no real competition in the open standards for solid model representation.
Mm-hmm.
No, complementing what Claudia was saying, we all know that IFC is pretty complicated, but in my opinion, is a miracle that there is something that is open, that is international standard that we can use, because otherwise we have only silos of formats that cannot talk to them. So there is complicated, but when communication between different groups is not complicated, every time that we try to communicate between different disciplines, between different groups, it's complicated. That's the way humans are. We are a mess. So IFC is messy, is the best that we have, and for that reason, I think we don't need to say, okay, IFC is everything that we need to learn, but because it's the standard, because it's open, I think we need to embrace it and promote it. Same with ISO. Maybe ISO, I don't know if ISO is a standard, that a standard means a convention. You know, a lot of people have come together to say, okay, this is the way that we are going to talk about this. Same as language. You know, we come out with language because we needed to have a way of communicating a complicated idea between each other. Right. So that's the reason why I think we need to embrace open standards, because it's the best we have.
But I am curious, I guess, contrary to that, you know, we're talking about people and challenges. When something's hard, we just don't want to do it. So how do you get people involved in actually implementing this, or even agreeing when it's like, you know what, I have to, like, ISO 19650 is so scary and intimidating, and it's easier to give up and just keep on doing what's been doing than to implement it. So how do we cross that barrier? And I think that actually comes to like your question about expertise and development. It's like, where is that in between zone where there's enough acceptance that it can be integrated, or you can meet in the middle, instead of it being the two extremes of being, you know, having that knowledge but not having enough knowledge of development, or adopting a standard and then not having enough of the standard in order to have it interoperable with other, I don't know, software, data, whatever it will be.
Great, please.
I'll make a very small point about what we're looking at in the future of IFC. And it's an odd discussion to have, because IFC started so early that the things people cared about in Express, which is how people see IFC, that wall of text, they cared about, like, well, I can't store more than 5K on a floppy disk or 120K on a floppy disk. So they did all these things you would never do in a modern standard, like have I don't want to repeat this value, so I'm going to reference it 1,000 times. Well, if you look at an IFC file, there's all kinds of these sort of things in there that would never need to exist if revisited today. So these are the things that are on the table for revisiting, not the semantics, but do I need to describe these complex relationships, or just repeat the data, but I know it's the same value because I have a GUID, this sort of stuff that we're looking at.
Are there any questions from the audience? Because I had written down 19650 as a question, and I was afraid to bring it up. So I'm glad you said the word. So, because I noticed that wasn't in your matrix.
It wasn't in the matrix. Yes, that's correct. We can talk about 19650.
Okay.
What would you like to talk about?
Well, I've heard from practitioners that it's essentially and I won't say who said this. Greg knows him. But he said that it was necessary but unwieldy, and really impossible to implement in its entirety.
I mean, it's a framework, and you know, I spent the later half of last year when I was at Diamond Schmidt just interpreting the ISO standard against processes that we were seeing on projects, right? So that we could understand the differences, how far away we were from the standard. Again, it's a process, and it's a framework that I think will help the industry ebb and flow together much better. than we're doing right now. You know, actually, we were just chatting during the break about even just the procurement of a consultant team, you know, and if the goal is digital twin, you know, just clarifying to owners what they need to actually provide to the consultants in order to get to a point where they can get a digital twin. To ask for that during construction or during construction documents, you know, is not ideal, will not result in, you know, satisfactory result. And so I think that's where the framework can really help, is really just, you know, having us understand. Now, the terminology is very difficult to grapple with, and the terms, and they generalize things so that it can be, you know, it's international and generic. BuildingSmart Canada does have intentions to help make it more accessible, the language around the framework being more accessible to the Canadian market. But there've been, you know, lots of other companies have been doing the same type of thing. Again, it's a framework that will help, I think, have all the sectors of the industry really kind of, you know, work the same. Just like, you know, at some point, it was standardized, you know, you do pre-design, schematic design, design development, you know, could you imagine if that wasn't in place? Like that's the standard kind of design workflow. So that, I think that's what the framework will help do. It's just right now it's an acronym. You know, it's like the acronyms are a bit much, but we'll fix that.
Is everyone in the room familiar with the ISO 19650? It's an adaptation of the British EAS 1192, right?
Yes, yeah.
So it's BIM's an international standard for BIM, essentially. And it's a tough read. Yeah. Greg or Antonio, do you have any thoughts on ISO 19650?
I mean, I can have an opinion. If Antonio doesn't have anything, the only thing I would like was correctly pointed out, it's an international standard that's meant to be adopted locally. So people that try to use it as an international standard are just, you know, trying to eat with their hands behind their back. So yeah, that's where people, I think, trip up with it. They try to adopt it directly, and it is difficult.
We have one more question from the chat. Actually, there was an earlier one. Yeah, we answered that one. I work on a construction site as a site engineer, not a programmer. I believe in IFC and OpenBIM. That is the only way to go forward together. Good work, you all, and I want to thank you. This is Cooperation International. Thank you. And my question: how can we increase this cooperation? Your opinion, please. Very nice message. Thank you.
Well, I have an opinion. I think that there needs to be a huge culture shift in our industry. And I think that there's just a lot of, I guess, embedded processes that no longer serve us, and our inability to recognize or change or even understand how deeply embedded they are is what's problematic. I think that the concept of even like respect and expertise, it's like there's a pre-qualification to having an innovative idea. And so where can somebody who has something interesting to say or wants to make a change, how are they able to reach those who are able to actually, you know, put that into place? And I think that there's a huge gap there. And I think that that's something that we have a problem with in architecture. I mean, I don't know if that's based on how it's being licensed or what job an architect actually does, but I think that that openness to talking to people as people and understanding we're all working on the same problem is one of the biggest barriers to just getting down to, hey, we all want to fix this one thing. Can we just concentrate on that and put, I don't know, ego and I don't know, past processes aside and think differently about it and be open to that. But as Nico said, it's complicated.
That's the fun part. I mean, one of the arguments for BIM is increased cooperation. And I will say that I've experienced projects where it actually has enhanced cooperation. I think a lot of that is in how it's set up and integrated into the project, and how much the people, those responsible for setting up the project, make it clear that communication is essential, and then open up those paths for communication. So I think we all need to contribute to that notion of cooperation. And again, Antonio, your enthusiasm is absolutely infectious. So you make me feel optimistic about the world, which I hope it'll last at least a couple of hours.
Yeah, thanks. No, yeah, I just my comment on that question was, I think that the biggest clash that I have detected between the software development culture and the construction culture is that our industry is extremely reluctant to share absolutely anything. Like, it is a classic, at least in Europe, the architect that don't want to send the CAD drawings because he would be sharing his blogs, and he doesn't want to share his blogs because they are his blogs and no one else's. So I think that this needs to change if we want to progress, because with that individualism, we are just shooting ourselves on the foot, basically, in my opinion.
No, I agree. It's amazing how consistent it is around the world. So
I actually have a question for
Greg had a point.
Well, just to close the loop here, I think we have to also realize that people have there are different groups to answer the question of areas of cooperation. I don't know if Stephen didn't say my infectious nature or my enthusiasm was infectious, because he's met me before. But like, I used to be someone that spent a lot of time talking about software and helping people, but I've sort of moved to a camp where actually I think we have to solve a core problem, that we should make it easy to take work away from people. So I have a view of the world that's, close to software, but about systems thinking. And I don't really want to have conversations with Revit anymore, but there's layers of this conversation, and we're not very good at making different groups. And I think I might have passed this long before, is we have a very weak link in this different strata between academia and industry, and we don't make these sort of we don't make the connections at these different levels often very well. So if, like, to sort of enhance collaboration and cooperation, like, I'd wish, Stephen, we could figure out a way to have your data scientist people talk to me. Other people could not have to talk to me then. But that's a perfect example of more precise collaboration in these things, because I think we need to solve many different levels: people, process, systems, technology, and so forth.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Greg. With you.